with knee pain, shoulder pain, back pain, and that's sort of we had the need to address obesity and overweight issues in my clinical practice as well. It's generated an interest in it for me for several years, and I've also had the opportunity of serving on the American Academy of Pediatrics Executive Committee, and I had the pleasure of co-writing the sports and energy drink paper, which we'll talk a little bit about in the course of this as well. So our objectives today are to discuss the health impact of sugar-sweetened beverages in adolescents, to review, in particular, the benefits or risks of sports and energy drinks in the youth population, and to look at strategies for education, with particular regard to sports and energy drinks. So what drinks are considered sugar-sweetened beverages? I think we're getting the idea here, but there's sodas. And can I just put a quick disclaimer out there? I may use a lot of certain products on the market to sort of highlight some of the educational points today, but in no way are they discriminatory or favoring one particular company over the other. It's simply to illustrate some educational points today, which is why we're all here. Fruit drinks as well, iced teas and sweet teas, sports drinks, flavored water. And just, I think there's been a lot of variety of facts and figures thrown out there, but just one soda a day can add up to even as much as 15 pounds a year in an adolescent. There's a few studies that have looked at adolescent consumption. In 2004, there was, out of the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, they showed that adolescents can consume up to about 300 kilocalories per day from sugar-sweetened beverages. And that can range around 11 to 13% of their total caloric intake. That can be 15 teaspoons of sugar or more per day. What's interesting is the more recent studies, and I think Dr. Rao pointed out, that there's certainly some issues with underserved populations, lower socioeconomic classes, and those issues of gender, race, ethnicity, and all that have been raised to look at differences. And there were more differences historically. But more recent studies are showing that those differences are going away. And since 2000, there seem to be, in the adolescent population, fairly consistent trends that are actually independent of these issues. So what adolescents are starting to behave more similarly with regard particularly to SSBs. One of the things that's most important is kids tend to only drink so much all day long. So the more they're taking in a sugar-sweetened beverage, the less likely they are to be taking in with the recommended daily amounts of low-fat milk, water, or 100% fruit juice. And that can lead to dietary gaps, if you will, such as calcium, iron, folate, and vitamin A. There's some studies in adolescents that show that in a Midwest setting like here, adolescents, up to 60% of them can be deficient in vitamin D, particularly in the winter. So what is a serving size? I think this actually challenged us a bit when we did the sports and energy drink paper, because every research that we went through, every review article, every data point that was out there on public health websites, we had to really dissect out, well, this study is talking about this amount of caffeine, about amount of teaspoons of sugar, etc. What were they really comparing? Are they comparing apples and apples with what is the serving size? And you all can answer that question for yourself as to what you think the real serving size is supposed to be. It could be the super, super big gulp size, but a standard serving size is really supposed to be 8 ounces. And how many of you have seen those, what we call in our family the minis, the little mini Coca-Cola cans that are out there? Those 8-ounce cans are probably what we should be drinking. And I've yet to ever find that in a vending machine anywhere. I think the smallest size you usually find is about 12 ounces. And more typically, we're seeing now 20-ounce sizes of everything, everywhere you go. That could be a 20-ounce beverage, could be 2.5 times of a serving. And kids, to me, whatever's in their hand, kids and adults, we make that mistake, that if I have a 20-ounce, that's one bottle, one serving. But it's really not the case. So we have a lot of education to do with regard to that. This might be a bit difficult to see in the back, but again, just reminding you of typical carbohydrate content of beverages. Anything from 0 teaspoons of sugar in water, and then as seeing low-fat milk tops the chart behind water as having less carbohydrate, and as you work your way down to fruit-flavored beverages and then to large fountain pops, you can have over 50 teaspoons of sugar. In second grade at my school, we all had to build monuments. And I saw the most interesting monument, and I wish that I had it to bring today. Someone built out of sugar cubes the Washington Monument. And it makes me think today, as I stand up here and talk to you, that that would be like a big goal. You know, you can imagine 51 sugar cubes stacked up there. And they glued those all together and made a very beautiful Washington Monument. Comparing non-diet soda, orange juice and low-fat milk, because I think that we tend to promote those more frequently as being more recommended in healthier beverages. So I just want to take a moment and have you look at a non-diet soda. Typical calories would be around 160. And orange juice and 1% milk, about the same in terms of the calories that you're exposing your body to. But in terms of the vitamins in typical sodas, not so much. In terms of orange juice, you can see that you can benefit much more greatly in terms of daily vitamins, calcium, potassium, and magnesium that are good for adolescents to have. And the same thing in 1% milk. You actually get the highest vitamin A, by far the highest calcium and potassium as compared to other beverages that kids tend to take in. There's some significant health risks obviously associated with sugar-sweetened beverages, and I point out the ones that I encounter in my practice. Obesity and diabetes are certainly common. You're going to hear quite a bit about cardiovascular issues as well. But I have to deal with the bones. And so we see adolescents who have stress fractures. We're looking at, there's more of an interest in doing bone densities in young adolescents and seeing that they are not reaching their peak of bone density development. So that puts them at increased lifetime risk of having osteoporosis or osteopenia as adults, particularly obviously in the young female population. So that's a big concern. And certainly the dental decay, headaches are a main issue, and anxiety and sleep disturbances as well. And these obviously translate into their lifestyle, their satisfaction with their lifestyle, also school performance. So things start to sort of circle around. In terms of a healthier drink guide, obviously I think the message here is water, water, water. These are some of the names of water in different languages. So I thought that was very interesting when I Googled that. This is not all-inclusive, but you may recognize some from your own ethnic background. So water is universal everywhere. And my husband is Greek, and we had the pleasure of going to Greece this summer. And in Greece, this is a mountain stream, and people come from all over, and they bring bottles, and they fill them out of the mountain stream, and they take this home, and they drink the mountain stream water. And yes, we're climbing in it, and people are drinking it, but we also had a picnic, and I didn't want to bring all the pictures of Greece, where we chilled the watermelon in the mountain stream, drank water out of the mountain stream, and enjoyed our picnic. And it was really amazing and very fabulous. And so it's just a neat place to be if you ever get the opportunity to go. They drink a lot of water in Greece. They drink a lot of other things that are not so good for you, but they do drink a lot of water in Greece. So, water. At least half of your daily fluid intake should come from water. That's at least 5 cups per day for kids and 10 cups per adult. But that's a minimum. And really, almost any way you turn around, there's reasons where you need to drink above and beyond that. And the more classic, 64 ounces a day, you can shoot for very quickly. Skim milk and soy milk and 1% low-fat milk, approximately 2 cups per day. That does count towards a total beverage intake. And then only about 4 ounces a day of 100% fruit juice as well. So you have to be careful while we talk about fruit juice, but not 20 ounces of that either. That still starts to be a sugar overload. Some of the tips that are helpful for water intake are to encourage kids to choose water first as a routine beverage of choice. And I think it's very important that we promote in our communities and particularly in our schools that water is freely available, not just on the sporting field, but everywhere you go. With water fountains, some classes allow kids to have water bottles. I know our elementary school allows the students to have a water bottle in their classroom now, and things like that. There's some interesting work out of Oded Bar-Or in Canada and some other work that's been published over 20, 30 years in sports medicine and pediatric medicine that showed that almost universally children can double or even triple the amount of fluid that they can drink at a single sitting if it's cooled or flavored, and preferably cooled and flavored. So that's important to remember as well. because you can flavor that naturally yourself. Particularly when you go to a restaurant, you can ask for a slice of lime or lemon in your water, and even my kids will drink more when it's ice water with lime or lemon in it, or even small amounts of fruit juice. Water is an essential part of the daily diet. The body is 60% water. Adequate hydration is needed for all of the daily physiologic functions that we perform. And the goal is to maintain euvolemia, or a normal state of hydration. So how much do you really need? Well, as I said, the amount of water that everyone needs is actually very individual. It depends quite a bit, and it can vary day to day, month to month, season to season if you're doing sports, by your diet, recent illnesses, medications that you take, or any chronic health conditions as well. With exercise, there's great attention to the intensity and the length of time that people participate, as well as heat and humidity. And then people's individual sweat rates vary dramatically. So you can be a salty sweater and sweat a lot of salt out. You can be a heavy water sweater and sweat a lot of water out, or you can sweat a lot of salty water out, where you may have a less robust sweat rate as well. And that may change the amount of water that you need to replenish, or electrolytes, as we'll talk about with exercise. Dehydration is simple. It's a mismatch between the amount of water that you're taking in and the amount of water that you're losing through conduction, evaporation, etc., all the mechanisms that we lose water. Evaporation is by far the most common mechanism that our bodies lose water from. And dehydration can be associated with fatigue, impaired sport performance, which obviously affects my world, occasional electrolyte abnormalities, and an increased risk of heat illness. And then, again, that's particularly in the sports setting. But a message that I find very effective in clinic, whether I'm talking to an athlete or just a sedentary adolescent, is the presence of thirst. So that's one key point of a question that you can ask very easily. If you feel thirsty, how many of you feel thirsty right now? All right, then you're at least 3% dehydrated. All right, so when we have a break, we'll all have some water. But thirst mechanism is triggered pretty quickly with small amounts of dehydration. So one thing that I tell adolescents, if you're thirsty all day in school, you're not drinking enough water, and certainly in athletics, if you start a practice, particularly in the heat, thirsty, you're starting practice dehydrated. Obviously that's a big issue with football, above everything else with summer, with double practices. You all can go home and ask your youths that are in your families as well, and kind of start screening them to see if they're going to their sporting events or activities, and if they're thirsty when they go, then they're behind on their fluid intake for the day. So now we'll move on to the sort of the focus of the talk, which is sports versus energy drinks and defining the difference. It was interesting when we first started at the Academy looking at this paper that it was surprisingly difficult to ascertain exactly from the research and the literature out there what the distinguish was. We distinguished it pretty readily, but some of the literature didn't do such a good job. So everybody should know this, but I'll review it quickly. A sports drink is a flavored beverage that contains carbohydrates, minerals, electrolytes, and sometimes vitamins or other nutrients, as there's some sports drinks that have protein in it and amino acids. An energy drink is a form of stimulant substance. So it's a drink that contains a stimulant, such as caffeine or guarana, in addition, usually, to carbohydrate, minerals, electrolytes, proteins, and amino acids. And we'll talk about the low carbohydrate forms as well briefly. So you drink a sports drink to get energy, but you're trying to get energy because your body needs carbohydrate to do sport. That is different than an energy drink where you're trying to get a non-nutritive stimulant substance, such as caffeine, in your body. Our bodies do not have a need for caffeine, ever. All right, so in terms of marketing it, this is huge. This is one of our biggest concerns, and we don't have a good handle, not even really on the dollars spent. All we know is that there's this huge trend with the marketing of sports drinks. Because I congratulate Vanguard on their movement to decrease sugar-sweetened beverages in hospital environments and in school environments, and we can all applaud the efforts there. But I know when we applauded Illinois, when they first changed the vending machines and decreased the amount of Coke and Pepsi in machines, who produces Snapple, Gatorade, Coke does. And Sample was there. Well, Sample's got the same or more sugar that a Coke does, and then they have big sizes, and same thing with some of the other beverages. So from a sugar standpoint, you weren't necessarily moving in the right direction with some of the initial changes that are made. So marketing sports drinks, the pediatric population is a huge target, and I feel pediatricians tend to feel like advocates for their patients and the kids that they take care of. And I feel that there's a strong need for me and others to really advocate to protect our youth from the marketing that's targeted at them, and I'll show you some of that with sports and energy drinks. So they're marketed, they're called a sports drink because they're really meant for athletes to replace fluid, carbohydrate, and electrolytes lost in sweat. Energy drinks are different. They are marketed to give you more energy. And how many of you have adolescents that you're around? They really do seem like they're fatigued all the time, don't they? They're all seeking more energy. So, it's very easy to see how they fall victim to marketing for a product that would give them more energy. I like this picture. I took this when I did an interview recently because I was rather appalled to find this energy drink in the market that looks like a juice box with a juice box straw attached to it. As an adult, I tend to not drink beverages that look like juice boxes. So I wondered if this was marketed at a more adolescent or youthful population that might be more used to having a juice box straw attached to their beverage. So in general, this is a take-home. If you remember little else from anything that I say today, this is a take-home point. Stimulant-containing energy drinks have absolutely no place in the diets of children or adolescents. They do not need an energy drink to get more energy. They do not need to use this for sport participation to replace their carbohydrates. They do not need to have the caffeine mixed in with it. It's not healthy. In terms of sport drink use, obviously it's a concern that sports drinks are being marketed and used as beverages. You do not need a sports drink for breakfast, lunch, or dinner. You do not need a sports drink as a snack. The only use, because it can contribute to the risk of pediatric overweight and obesity. Calories range dramatically, 10 to 70 per serving, and a sports drink 10 to 270 for energy drinks. What's interesting is when surveys, and there are not that many that have been done in the literature, but they've shown that adolescent population does not distinguish the difference between a sport or an energy drink. And the reasons include good taste, quenching thirst, and extra energy boost. So they're looking to buy and drink these types of beverages. Some historical data in the last 20 or 30 years or so that's looking at the trends in sport drink consumption. And again, I alluded to this earlier, but between 1988 and 1994, and then comparing 1998 to 1999 to 2004, sorry about that, the share of sugar-sweetened beverage consumption from sports drinks tripled in the adolescent population. And since 2000, while the purchase of carbonated soft drinks has decreased, the total sport drink sales has increased dramatically in the school system setting to almost 20% of the total sales. And if you want to just look at two 12-ounce, and again, I see more 20-ounce than 12-ounce of servings out there, it seems to me, but two 12-ounce servings at 50 cents a day, which I'm sure it's more than that is spent, that can cost up to $24 billion a year. So if all these athletes that are having these small amounts of sports drinks on a daily basis as a beverage were to drink water instead, then they could save billions of dollars. And it also explains, I think, why billions of dollars are being spent on marketing. So to review the components of the sports drink, so we're very clear about what's going on. The body's most important source of energy. Carbohydrate is best taken in the regular diet. And I think we established this in the previous two talks, in combination with a balanced diet of protein and fat, and we'll do better. But there is one use with a sports drink, and that is for an athlete who's performing vigorous exercise for over an hour. In the first hour of exercise, only water is needed. Beyond an hour, you've depleted your glycogen and your sugar stores, as well as probably your electrolytes at that point based on your sweat rate. That is time to replenish. So that's time when you do need a sports or a carbohydrate electrolyte type drink, and it's very appropriate. And if you withhold that, In a football player or an athlete who's out there for 2 or 3 hours on the field, you can have serious issues with low sodium hyponatremia, low blood sugar, or even what we call water intoxication, where you can overhydrate with water and have hyponatremic seizures and then have a cardiac event. Such as a few years ago, the woman that died in the Chicago Marathon. Her goal, she was young, she was 40 years old, but she wanted to make sure that the yellow color had disappeared from her urine prior to starting the race, so she had hyperhydrated with water, ran the race, drank only water on the course, and went down, and her sodium was 117, and normal would be around the 135 range, and she had seizures, cardiac arrest, and died. So that was potentially a preventable death. We don't want that in our youth. All right, I don't have too much time to go over all of this, but again, this table is available in the AAP paper on sports and energy drinks, and it just, again, shows you all the different brands that are out there. You can look at it different ways on calories and carbohydrates, and if you see some common themes in terms of the manufacturers, just pay attention to that, because they will make their money one way or the other. I just have one slide on dental risks, just to bring it up, because people are asking me and asking us in general, well, we're okay with G2 then and the lower calorie beverages then, that's an okay drink because that you don't have to worry about the sugar in those sports drinks. So maybe our kids can use those more as beverages or not just for sports. Well, the two issues with that is obviously there's an association because they're highly acidic with enamel demineralization. The citric acid, since a lot of these have citric acid in them, is erosive. And up to 50%, there was a good study by Bartlett that showed that up to 50% had enamel erosion in 11 to 14 age range. And that's independent of carbohydrate content. So there's a risk of using those low-calorie sports drinks because of the dental issues. It's also, you have to be careful that if your athlete is supposed to be having a sports drink on the athletic field, that they don't have the low-carbohydrate form out there with them if they're a soccer player or football player as well, for example, or anyone who's out there over an hour. So a couple words on caffeine. Sodas, remember, are also a source of caffeine, although it's lower than the energy drinks. And caffeine is not healthy for our athletes. Caffeine intake has risen steadily in the youth population, and it peaks in adolescents. 60% of adolescent females and 70% of adolescent males are taking a daily caffeine intake in some form or another. I hope this doesn't apply to us. But it might in terms of how coffee gets us through our day as adults. But one thing that we can't discount is that caffeine has what we call an ergogenic effect, or performance enhancing effect. It can increase aerobic endurance, it can increase strength, it can improve reaction time, meaning it makes you faster, and it can delay fatigue in adult literature. So we have to acknowledge that is out there, and that's one reason that athletes are looking to caffeine to enhance their sport performance or even to stay awake to finish work in school. But these effects are variable, they're dose dependent, they're not well studied in children. The one thing about caffeine is, remember, it's a non-nutritive substance, but it has whole body effects. You cannot take it and have it just work on your muscles to make you go a little faster in sport, or just make you more alert so that you can pay more attention to the work that you're doing. It's going to have a head-to-toe effect on your body. I don't have time to read all this to you, but it's important. I had a patient with ADHD that I saw actually in the hospital who had a seizure. He was on a stimulant medication for his ADHD, and at lunch at high school, he was 15, he drank 2 20-ounce Mountain Dews, went to class and had a seizure, and they had to call the paramedics, and the teacher was unhappy, let me tell you. So, and that's all it took. And so he was in the hospital for 2 days, just sorting through and trying to decide conclusively whether that was actually related to his caffeine intake or not. And the cardiologist and neurologist said that they had a high index of suspicion. And that's about where we're at with that. It's a clinical presentation often. Toxicity, you gotta be careful with our littler kids though. A 10-year-old who weighs maybe about 75, 80 pounds, is 35 kilos, has 3 sodas, might have 36 milligrams of caffeine. 1 5-hour, 2-ounce energy is 160 milligrams of caffeine. A Monster energy drink has about 160 also, but a Monster energy drink that's 20 ounces is 2.5 servings versus a 2-ounce 5-hour energy that some of these folks are pounding back 2 or 3 of those. I can't drink 60 ounces of these big 20-ounce drinks, but I can drink more than 1 2-ounce 5-hour energy. So those ones scare me the most. A lethal dose is reported in the literature. People have died from caffeine at doses of 200 to 400 milligrams per kilogram. That's quite high, obviously. At the American Association for Poison Control Centers, in 2005, 4,600 calls were reported for caffeine concerns. Over 2,500 of those involved persons under age 19. 80% of those calls, so around 2,000, actually needed medical assistance. So I made this blurry on purpose because it's really, really, really hard to read the supplement facts there and in terms of energy. So in case you didn't know how much caffeine is on the 5-hour energy, let me tell you that it doesn't say. The energy blend is, and we couldn't find it on the Beverage website when we wrote our paper or on the ABA website either, 1,870 energy blend milligrams are in. And this is, again, in other energy drinks as well, where there's an energy blend, not just 5-hour energy. And it consists of lots of stimulant-containing substances, including caffeine. So I don't really know what you get when you get 5-hour energy. So in summary, food is fuel. My population, athletes, do better when they eat healthy. They take their calories in a balanced way, eating more of them than drinking them. Athletes who don't get the right fuel will run out of gas. Energy needs vary, and that's true of non-athletes as well. Before the Beijing Olympics, I was selected as a volunteer team physician for the Olympic Training Center in Colorado Springs. What was interesting to me is they had 4 full-time nutritionists working with professional chefs there in terms of establishing the athletic diet. I ate in the cafeteria. I never ate so well in my life. I lost 4 pounds in 2 weeks. I also had to climb in Colorado Springs. I acclimatized, so I got my workouts in. But it was interesting to see there was a tremendous amount of attention paid to the healthy nutrition of our Olympic athletes. And that brings the point home that it starts down here with all of us being healthy for our youth, who will be our future Olympians. Energy balance is the message I always say, just like obesity, calories in, calories out. So just like anorexia and other eating disorders, what you take in of foods, fluids, and supplements has to be balanced with your output and your expenditure of energy. All right, and that can vary depending on how much physical activity you do, what your basic metabolic rate is, etc. So it's very individual. And that's one of the challenges clinically of addressing these issues, particularly obesity in athletes, because the same pattern, there's certain trends that work well, but it still has to be individualized for everybody. I have just a word on vending machines, and I'll finish up. Obviously, it's a big problem. They're everywhere, but I like this. For your next exercise, get a Twix. And this poor little gymnast is reaching in there. So here's a recommendation for vending machines, because this is something we can do in our communities as well. Keep vending machines off during school hours. Keep the machines off during lunch periods. Prohibit sale of foods of minimal nutritional value during school hours. Try to keep the vending machines in out-of-the-way locations in the schools. And discourage schools from depending on vending machine revenue to fund their education. That's been one of the biggest barriers in terms of successes in changing what goes on with vending machines in school settings. Do school bans lower SSB consumption? This is a study that came out in March of 2012, so just less than about a month ago, and I did want to review it briefly. Tauber found that in longitudinal survey data of almost 7,000 children in 5th through 8th grade, looking across the country, there were 11 states that banned soda only in their schools, 7 states banned all sugared beverages, and 22 states had no bans at all. And I looked at the study. It was a good study. It was well done. Consumption rates were lower in school when all SSBs were banned, so that sounds good. If only soda was banned, there was a substitution effect. So people still wanted their sugared beverages, so they tended to drink more of the sugared alternatives that were there. And that might be, for example, your sports drink or your iced tea or something like that. But sadly, out-of-school consumption rates were unchanged in any situation. So even if we address what's going on in the schools, that we still have work to do in the families and the communities to see those interventions. And finally, the take-home points: energy drinks have no place in the diet of youth or adolescents. Sports drinks add unnecessary calories in the diet and are forms of SSBs. Sports drink use is indicated only in high-intensity workouts of greater than 60 minutes, so they do have a place. They erode dental enamel. They add unnecessary sodium to the diet. A 32-ounce Gatorade Powerade gives you almost 500 milligrams of sodium. And water is adequate for most hydration needs. Thank you very much. Here's a thought for the day. If we could give every individual the right amount of nourishment, exercise, not too little and not too much, we would have found the safest way to health. Does anyone know who said that? Another reason to go to Greece, Hippocrates. All right, my husband's always very proud of this. And that's it. Thank you very much.